What's up, YouTube? Zach's back with another attack, and today we're doing a no spoiler, none at all review for The Last Jedi, the new Star Wars movie. So I know a lot of people have been wanting me to talk about this movie a little bit, so we're about to get right into that. But first, what program do Jedis use to open PDF files? Adobe One Kenobi. If you like darkness and hanging with Heartless, then you are not Sora, but you may be looking for a channel to watch. Zack to the future. What's up, guys? So, of course, we're talking about The Last Jedi with no spoilers. There's gonna be a few things that I will definitely touch on, but aren't really spoilers, and then we'll have a full spoiler review very, very soon. I want to go see the movie one more time just to make sure I've got everything that I want to say down. This is really a movie that you have to watch more than once and sit on. You got to think on it. The first time I saw this movie, I felt differently than the second time I saw this movie, and the more I sit on things, the more that they affect me a little bit differently. So I think that first off, you'll feel very similar in that vein. The first time you see it, you'll probably just be in so much anticipation of a new Star Wars film that you're gonna be feeling one way versus how you watch it after you've seen everything once and nothing's a huge shock anymore. That said, I've tried to kind of break this down into good things about the movie and bad things about the movie because I don't want to be totally negative and say, this movie sucked, everything was horrible, even though that's what half the people on the internet seem to want to say. But at the same time, I don't want to say, best movie ever, this movie's the best. That was weird, I'm sorry. But speaking of singing, I gotta say the music in this movie is grade A. This is just, of course, Star Wars always has great music, but this is no exception. If you hate everything about this movie, the music's one thing that you should love, because it's classic Star Wars. I'm pretty sure John Williams is back at it, doing everything he does so amazingly, and it really puts you back in a galaxy far, far away. If nothing else, watch the movie for the music. Secondly, I gotta say this movie's great because of its women. Star Wars has kind of been a thing where men are the main focus, but of course with Leia there's been some inclusion of women and major roles and things for them all along. But Leia's been the main woman. There's been Queen Amidala and things like that in the prequels, but who likes the prequels that much anyway, you know. But of course this movie, we've got Rey, you've got Leia, and you've got a couple other female faces that are very good to see having major roles in this movie. You'll see what I mean, and hopefully you enjoyed that about this movie if nothing else. I also have to say that this movie had a very, very compelling story. Whether you like it or not, as a Star Wars story, that's one thing. You can hate this as a Star Wars movie, like some do, but as a story of its own, it's pretty compelling. It's got good twists and turns, and it knows what it's doing. It does try a little too hard sometimes to not let you know what's going on, which can be a pro or a con depending on how you look at it. For example, being unpredictable is great. Nobody knew at the time that Darth Vader was Luke's father, so that unpredictability was really, really cool. But some people probably hated that and the implication that Leia's his sister and they kissed and everything, so some people probably hated that, other people loved it. But other than that, this movie is very compelling. It's got great cameos, and that makes it very, very good, in my opinion. Another thing I like is that even if you don't like the prequels, like I just said, it's got a lot of callbacks to it in good ways. It doesn't call back to pod racing. There's no pod race in this movie, but it does have some things that really make you remember. Jar Jar's not in this movie. I'm not saying that, but it does have some things that tie it all together, and that's what I love, because of course the original trilogy couldn't call back too much to the prequels. They tied some things into the prequels that tied into the original trilogy and made it a little weird, but of course this movie now has all of the previous ones to work with, and it deals with all of that really, really well. Another thing is that you'll be able to tell almost immediately if you love or hate this movie. In the first couple minutes, it tells you straight up what this movie is going to be like. There's jokes in this movie, which some people will love and some people will hate. Sometimes it can feel a little bit more like a Marvel movie than a Star Wars movie, and that's good to me. I like some humor as long as the jokes hit and the jokes aren't too corny, like my Adobe One Kenobi at the beginning of this video. But all in all, I think the humor's good when it's good, and kind of bad when it's bad. Which, to be honest, the first time I watched this movie, all of the jokes hit. I thought they were very funny. The second time, a few of them fell a little flat because it wasn't such a surprise. There's also another scene that I don't want to spoil, but there's a scene very, very early on where something happens, and you'll almost immediately be able to tell if you love or you hate this movie. And a lot of that has to do with characterization. That's where I'm going to leave that. I will say that the porgs are used very, very nicely in this movie. They're not a toy sellout, or if they are, they're not strictly that. They're not overbearingly used for marketing toys and such. They do have some humor to them, some cuteness, but they are definitely used in the story well, and they're not overwhelming. So I really, really like that. It's not another Ewok controversy. And lastly, for the good of this movie, it's got Mark Hamill. Oh man, he is the best. And that's not coming from a original trilogy fanboy. Although I do like those movies, I gotta say, he has only gotten better. I love him as the Joker, and sometimes I get hints of his Joker persona creeping into his Luke Skywalker persona. Ignore everything that Mark Hamill has said leading up to the release of this movie. I'm sure you've heard some of it, but he has since come out and said that that was wrong, and so don't listen to that. But definitely, I think you will love Mark Hamill. He's the best part of this movie. His acting is the best it's ever been. If anyone in this movie deserves to get like an Oscar or anything, it is him. And the way that he calls back to the Jedi should be dead, like he said in the trailer for this movie, is just incredible. Because, once again, he calls back to the prequels and talks about how Anakin went to the dark side because of the Jedi, and the way that they were so overconfident, they didn't see that the Emperor was rising through the ranks within them. So I really liked how they handled him and his acting of the character and things like that. The way they handled the Jedi should end and all that. But now we gotta get into a few bad things about this movie. Why everyone may hate this movie, because there has been quite a bit of hate for this movie. And first off is the fact that it's got some of the worst effects in Star Wars history. Not consistently, not throughout the whole movie, because it also has some of the best scenes of the entire series. Some of the action scenes in this movie are the best in Star Wars history, but some of the effects, one or two in particular, will drive you mad. They are really the worst I've ever seen in not only any Star Wars movie, but any movie I've seen in a long time. And for a Star Wars movie to have those horrible effects is very, very bad. Another thing is that this movie comes in at 2.5 hours, so it's a bit long-winded. I gotta admit, my first time watching it, I was very, very enthralled. The second time, I was sitting there a bit like, this is dragging on a little bit, and you may have that same feeling, especially because the pacing can be a bit off at times, and it's hard to describe that without giving away major scenes and things, but there is one specific part where it really throws off the pacing. Most people have complained about it in reviews, and I think you will agree that it could probably be paced a lot different, if not almost cut out entirely. And on the same note, I don't think the new cast is fully in yet. They're not fully evolved into Star Wars. I know Mark Hamill has worked with them a lot to tell them how their new life will be now that they're part of this huge franchise, and how to act as Star Wars characters, in a way. But I really don't see them as Star Wars characters entirely yet. I think that Luke, right off the bat, of course we saw him as a Star Wars character, and Jar Jar, nobody really liked him at first or now. There's other characters in the original trilogy who I think could have had more development, and my biggest problem with Rogue One was that nobody was developed well at all. I hated that movie. So this new trilogy kind of has some of the same problems with characters not being fully developed and not focusing on the characters enough to make them feel like they are the new Star Wars. But I definitely think that'll come. It's gotten better with this movie than it was in The Force Awakens, and I think we'll really hit the peak of that in Episode 9. But will Episode 9 be any good? This movie kind of sets up Episode 9 in a weird way. Of course, Episode 9 will happen, and it'll probably be decent, but I don't know if it'll be able to live up to everything that I thought it would after the Episode 7. With this new director, with Episode 8, and of course J.J. Abrams coming back for Episode 9, a lot of plot points have been totally thrown out the window. And that sucks, because so many things people have been wondering from Episode 7 are totally unimportant now. And I feel like if JJ had done the entire trilogy, those would have been stuck to very firmly. We would have gotten good answers, and it would have been more consistent throughout the whole trilogy as a thread, instead of setting up the thread and then dropping it and then maybe picking it back up when JJ comes back if he thinks they're important. I don't really know. I guess we'll see. Only time will tell. But if you hate how this movie is unpredictable, then you will hate how certain moments have a lot of setup with very little payoff, and I think a lot of that's just to throw you off your trail. If you think that this big setup is going towards something big specifically, and then the little payoff is something that's way different from what the big payoff would have been, that it was leading you to believe, and then totally smacking you out of the court. Not in my house. And I've just got 2 more points, which the first off is one of the biggest complaints I've got about this movie, and without giving too many spoilers, I can't say a whole lot, but I will say that their handling of Leia really pissed me off. Leia is one of the original characters, one of the most important characters in all of Star Wars, and of course, Carrie Fisher passed away, and of course she won't be able to be in Episode 9 because of that. Well, this movie doesn't handle that in the best way possible. They had some opportunities that they missed to really send her off in the best way, and they didn't do any of those. They didn't handle it in a way that I felt very happy at the end of the movie that her last film was dealt with in that way. So that could very easily make you hate this movie, and I think some people easily hate this movie just because of their handling of Leia and Carrie Fisher in general. But lastly, the last reason why you might hate this movie is because it completely reinvents Star Wars as we know and love it. And to me, that's kind of a good thing. I think that this movie, after 8 movies, and now we've got the Han movie and Rogue One and several TV shows, this holiday special, let's not talk about that, but it's getting a little old, it's getting stale, and it's too formulaic. So with the unpredictability of this movie and the way that it totally changes Star Wars as a whole and makes this galaxy far, far away so much bigger and more intense is incredible to me. I think it's much needed, and if they can handle that in a good way from here on out, I think that it'll be very, very good for the franchise and for the future movies to have better things, better setup for the world and the characters in general. And to me, that's kind of a good thing, but I can easily see how it could be a bad thing. People want nostalgia. People want more of the same, especially when you're dealing with something as big and memorable as Star Wars. This is like the epitome of so many people's childhoods, that messing with it too much is dangerous, and that makes a lot of people hate this movie. please, please, please go into this with an open mind. I gotta say that, if nothing else. This movie doesn't suck. I liked it. A lot of people didn't, but I really thought it was good, and certain parts were better than others, but at the end of the day, this movie was a Star Wars movie. I can't wait to see what they do with Episode 9 after this adventure. It'll be incredibly interesting, but I do have to say that this movie is one to go into blindly, with an open mind, and really get your own opinion, because the internet will say all kinds of horrible things about it, and I think that if you go in after reading horrible things about it, that will impact your judgment on it after your first viewing. So go see this movie. But in the meantime, guys, I've been Zach. Don't you do crack. Leave a comment in the shoe rack, and I will catch you in the future. Or in the past. In a galaxy far, far away.